I think that great coaching requires the consideration of the internal. So that's really what you're doing in a psychologically informed environment. You are critically considering the internal.
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast, where we believe coaches are some of the most important teachers and leaders in the world, and they deserve to be supported. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sports that will help you get better at teaching and leading so that you can develop high-performing teams and high-character people. Coaches, I'm excited to welcome Dan Abrahams to the podcast. Dan is a sports psychologist working alongside individuals, teams, coaches, and organizations globally. He is known for his passion to demystify sports psychology and for creating simple-to-use performance techniques. He is the author of 4 best-selling sports psychology books and is the founder of both the Dan Abrahams Soccer Academy and the Sports Psych Show podcast. A former professional golfer and PGA qualified, Dan has a first-class honors degree in psychology and a master's degree in sports psychology. In part 1 of our conversation, we talk about how to develop a psychologically informed environment, or P.I.E, as Dan calls it, autonomy supportive coaching, match scripts for players and coaches, and more. Like always, if you enjoy this episode and want to grab a copy of the free podcast notes, just go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download the notes from this episode, which are actually a special edition of notes that you're going to want to check out. I had a coaching friend of mine take these notes, and they are very detailed and really aesthetically pleasing as well. You're going to want to check out the notes from this episode. And at Cutting Edge Coaching, we believe finding practical ideas you can apply to become a better coach shouldn't be hard. That's why we're offering the first annual Summer Coaching Series, or SCS. The SCS includes 10 weekly presentations plus 2 bonus sessions with coaches and experts from across sports that are going to help you grow as a coach by giving you tons of practical ideas that you can apply in your coaching, regardless of sport. The Summer Coaching Series begins June 1st and will consist of weekly sessions through the first week of August. When you sign up for the SES, you'll get access to the live presentations and Q&As, the video replays, a private podcast feed of audio-only replays that you can listen to from anywhere, detailed coaching notes on each session, and more. We've got an incredible lineup of guests, including Alex Sarama of Basketball Immersion, Trevor Reagan from the Learner Lab, Alan Keane, Great Britain national team coach and co-founder of Movement Sports, and more. You can check out the entire lineup of presenters at summercoachingseries.com. And time is running out on the early bird price of $127, which runs through May 9th. Then the price goes up to $147. So grab your spot before the early bird price expires. And there's no risk for you because we're offering a 100% money-back guarantee if you're not satisfied with the value of the SCS within the first 2 weeks. You can learn more about the speakers, topics, and presentation times, and or sign up at summercoachingseries.com or just click the link in the show details. That's summercoachingseries.com. And one note about the conversation with Dan before we hop in. We recorded this podcast in person at a coaching convention, so you may hear a little background noise at times, but we did our absolute best to make sure the audio sounds great for you. Now to part 1 of my conversation with sports psychologist Dan Abrahams. Enjoy the episode. Coaches, really excited to welcome Dan Abrahams to the podcast today. Dan, thanks so much for joining me. And I would love it if we could just start off talking about psychologically informed environments, what that is, and how it can be so important and maximize player development.
Yeah, well, thanks for the question, Luke. I mean, it's a topic that's very close to my heart. It's something that I'm here in Kansas City to talk about. I'm presenting on it tomorrow. And yet it's something that I don't think is particularly known throughout the coaching world, this notion of psychologically informed environment, or P.I.E. I think every team needs to be driven by a P.I.E. I think every organization, every club, maybe every organization outside of soccer and sport should consider having a P.I.E, a psychologically informed environment. So what is this P.I.E? What is this psychologically informed environment? It's essentially, in very, very simple terms, when you strip it back, it's caring about, considering and caring the thoughts, feelings, personalities, experiences of the participants in the group of players that you are coaching, or in the participants within your organization. So I suppose it's considering the internal that drives the external. It's looking at the players in front of you. It's considering that the internal, the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, the motivations that drive the external, what you can see, the behaviors. I think we're very socialized in sports and sports coaching into looking only at behavior, observing behavior, and look, that can be a highly effective way to coach. Of course it can. Trapping that behavioral data and shifting behavior through your instruction, through your tasks. However, I think that great coaching requires the consideration of the internal. So that's really what you're doing in a psychologically informed environment. You are critically considering the internal. You are having better conversations, more sophisticated conversations with your fellow coaches, your colleagues, if you like. If you're in that environment where you've got a whole bunch of coaches within an organization, those conversations revolve around, who are these people? Where have they come from? Culturally, what have they experienced? From a familial perspective, maybe what experiences have they had? And you're not necessarily asking that question because there's something particularly maladaptive going on, but it's just considering the experiences that players have had. So that's what a P.I.E is. That's where we start. And honestly, to be honest, I always say to the audience, and I'll say this to the audience tomorrow when I'm delivering this. Look, that in and of itself is going to potentially improve your coaching just by considering these things. Just by, when I first sat down here, you said to me, you're a teacher, and it must be the same in teaching. You've got to consider all these internals and the social environment that these players have grown up, players and people and students have grown up in. So just by doing that, you are going to be a better coach. You're going to be better. Of course, then you need to potentially incorporate processes into your coaching practice that's going to help you take advantage of the knowledge that you're accruing as a consequence of considering these internal factors. So that's where I would start. And I'm sure we're going to come on and speak about, how coaches can start to incorporate those kind of techniques and stuff.
Well, yeah, I think that's really important. And I'd love if you just talked more about maybe some of those processes that as coaches we can begin to establish to ensure that it is this P.I.E, this psychologically informed environment. Because I totally agree with you. When we just take the time to consider who's in front of us, it should hopefully change how we go about things. Just recognizing who they are, the experiences they've gone through, even the age that they're at. Man, what did I need when I was a 15-year-old or 19-year-old or 20-year-old? That can be kind of an intimidating thing for a coach to consider. But like you talked about there, considering who's in front of you should change how you go about the work that you do. We shouldn't go about working with a 15-year-old the same that we go about working with a 20-year-old who's in college and aspiring to be a pro. Like, it's different based on who's in front of us. But talk more about what are maybe some of those processes that we can put in place to ensure that this is actually happening. Because it's one thing to talk about it, but if you don't have some habits or processes or systems to make sure that it is a part of your environment and culture, it probably isn't going to actually come to life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, there's so many things we can talk about here. So, I think from a practical perspective, that the number one thing I would always say to coaches is consider, within your P.I.E, are you establishing a motivational climate that's oriented towards performance and ego, or towards mastery and task? Performance and ego, or mastery and task. And what we pretty much know from the psychological literature, from sort of 40 years of research, is it's probably quite useful to strive to create a motivational climate that's oriented towards task and mastery. So helping players focus on mastering technical, tactical, physical sides of the game, rather than being overtly worried about how am I performing, what game have we got coming up? I'm worried about winning. I'm worried about if we're going to lose. I'm worried about my performance. I'm concerned about how I'm going to perform. I'm concerned about how I'm going to look. I'm just helping them really immerse themselves in mastery, in the processes that are going to help them improve, to help them be task oriented, help them have mini goals around their game, help them break down their game into tangible tasks that they've got to focus on, that when they come to practice, when they come to training, they've got something individually to focus on. And you could do that. One of the things that's important to note here is that you don't have to spend much time actually doing that for the player. You could urge the player to do that themselves. You could do that via email. You could actually send out a group email and ask each player to come along with a specific thing, a specific objective, specific task that they want to focus on in the next practice session. And maybe they have to send that back to you and inform you, or maybe they don't. That's okay. It depends.
And is that just technical, tactical, or are you thinking even mental side of the game too?
It could be anything. It could be technical, tactical, physical, or mental. But by doing that, you are tapping into the mental side of the game. You're cultivating concentration. You are helping them become better learners. You're helping them to engage in a little bit of self-awareness. Even if the player is just spending 5 minutes thinking about the game, thinking about specific things that they want to improve upon, you're helping them become self-aware. You're helping them to become a student of the game and a student of their game. You're helping them to break down their game. You're helping them to strategize. And then when they actually turn up and they put their cleats on and they run onto the field, as I say, you're cultivating their concentration, and then it's something that you're building your relationship with them. You're improving your communication. You're learning about them, and they're learning about you, and then it can improve the conversation between you and the player. It can cultivate that relationship. So I think this is the neat thing about focusing on a mastery environment within your P.I.E, your psychologically informed environment. Your learning outcomes, or the player's learning outcome, can be technical, tactical, and physical by nature, but you're helping them look at the game through a biopsychosocial lens. Bio being biological, psycho being psychological, social being the social environment. You're helping them look at the world through that lens, by engaging them in tasks.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think such a practical takeaway for coaches, just something like that to make a habit or a system of within your team or program. Maybe it's every week, maybe it's before every practice, some way that you can, just have players take a minute to consider what I'm focused on. And I think that's for coaches too. We should be doing that. What am I working on as a coach here going into this practice or training session? Like, what's success for me? How am I trying to grow in this space? Because if we're asking players to do it, we should be doing it too.
100%. And in my presentation yesterday at the convention, I mean, that's something that I challenged coaches to, if we're going to have this biopsychosocial lens, and underneath biopsychosocial, you can have all of these kind of factors such as motivation, learning, concentration, confidence, commitment, control, observation. That's a few of very many factors that one could consider. I challenge coaches to look at that from a granular perspective. I think it's important for coaches to critically analyze their own coaching, to ask themselves, okay, what was I trying to do there? How was I trying to do it? Why was I trying to do it in this way or in these ways? That why is really important. And from there, from that critical analysis, you can make a decision, okay, did that work? Was that effective? How can I do that better next time? Are there alternative ideas here? So you're 100% spot on. And I think for us to get better as coaches, as a coaching community, we need more critical appraisal of what we're doing. I think we've got to get away from this notion of there are truths out there. There are objective things. Of course there are. But it is a social science, and it's understanding, okay, what is true is only true within a context, or within the context you're coaching, the culture you're coaching, and the players in front of you. So it's important to critically analyze that and ask yourself, can I do this better? Was there a way to do this better? So I think that's an important thing to say. So thank you for prompting me there. I think just returning back to the specifics of engaging players in creating their own tasks, it would be remiss of me not to use this term autonomy supportive coach. An autonomy supportive coach. And the converse of that is a controlled coach. So that controlled coach is which there's nothing wrong with controlled coaching. That's more top-down, directive. I'm setting the agenda here as a coach. I'm going to set the through my session planning, I'm going to set the activities. I want you to do the activities, and you've just got to get on with it. And I might directly instruct within those activities. Autonomy supportive coaching is probably much more in line with what we know about motivation. If we want motivated players, what we pretty much know from 50 years of research is giving players greater autonomy, as in giving them greater involvement in the practices, in sessions, getting them involved. It can be really, really important. Helping them to relate to the to-be-learned material. Helping them to collaborate and relate to their peers, to their teammates is absolutely vital, and helping them feel competent as well is vital. We can explore that more. But by getting your players to just, even if it's just to spend 5 minutes thinking about one or two specific things that they want to work on, you're covering all of those psychosocial, biopsychosocial factors that we've spoken about so far. But you're also potentially turning up the volume of motivation because they're choosing something to focus on that's meaningful to them. And that's when players engage in activities. Sometimes they're less engaged because the activity, they don't necessarily find it meaningful, or they've done it all before. So if they've got something to focus on, then that's really useful. Now, what I would add here is as somebody who's an Englishman who lives in England and works out of England and is blessed to work with Premier League players and at Premier League clubs, I would say they're not very good at doing this with respect to them. I would say this needs to improve. This form of autonomy supportive coaching needs to improve. I often find myself asking players at the Premier League level, going to training this week, what were you trying to do? And often you hear the generic answer, the broad brush answer, well, I was just trying to train with intensity and focus. And, obviously the gaffer, the manager, has his game model that he's trying to teach us. So I'm doing that and getting involved there. But there's nothing necessarily specific that they're choosing about that game that they're trying to improve upon. And this idea really is taken from the research literature around deliberate practice. You want your players to practice deliberately and intentionally. So part of a P.I.E is having a mastery orientation. And part of that mastery orientation is helping players practice deliberately. And you can do that as an autonomy supportive coach. So can you see how it all links together, essentially?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing that I'm curious about here, and that I'm guessing in your work, maybe coaches push back on or struggle to wrap their mind around is, well, what does that actually look like on the practice field or in a game? It's one thing I send out a Google form to my athletes before practice and they respond, but then how might that actually change the way I coach my practices or coach my games if it's really this autonomy supported environment?
Hey, look, and it might not. It might not. You might choose just to do that initial thing, and that's all. But there is no truth here. And what you're doing is, and I said this to somebody yesterday in the audience who asked a question similar to this, is look, coaching is essentially a mini experiment every single day, every single activity, every single second. And I'm sure as a teacher yourself, you would say, yeah, kind of the classroom environment is a little bit like that. I'm experimenting with what I'm doing behaviorally, interpersonally, in order to strive to improve myself as a coach. I want my players to engage in a little bit of a mini experiment every single day. So you might do nothing more than that, but then you might crank up the dial. So you might have on your clipboard, if you do choose to have a clipboard, right, traditional coaching aesthetic, you might choose to have on your clipboard a note of all the mini deliberate practice objectives that players have for themselves. And that might afford you the opportunity to check in with a player. It might be, hey, Mary, you're focusing on your scanning here. Okay, how do you think it's going? If there's a mini break, drinks break, you might sidle up to Mary and say, hey, Mary, give me a mark out of 10 for how well you think you're scanning right now. Or you might say, hey, Mary, I saw you there checking your shoulder. What did you see there? Tell me more about what you were seeing. You made a decision based on what you saw. You made a decision there. Was that based on what you saw? What did you see? So it affords you the opportunity to potentially ask these questions and get involved with that player and individually coach within a team game. We can't team deliberate practice. The literature suggests that you can't really do that from a team perspective. Deliberate practice is all about individual practice. So you're driving that individual practice. And if you take a note of what each individual has, and they've supplied this for you, so it's not been a huge amount of work for you, then it gives you the opportunity to check in, ask a question, remind, deliberately instruct. You wanted to do this, Mary. You wanted to scan. I'm not seeing you do this. I just want you to check your shoulder a little bit more. Very basic stuff. I'm not a soccer coach, right? I'm not suggesting I have expertise. If people listening into this who've forgotten more about soccer than I'll ever know, but just think about human functioning and thinking about learning. So I would say that would be a next step. Now, you asked about a game. I would actually differentiate. So if I go back to 2012 when I sat down to write my first book, Soccer Tough, available on Amazon, everybody. Had to get that one in there, Luke. When I sat down, I wanted to... one of the first things I was thinking about when I was trying to demystify this stuff for coaches and for players, because I wrote the book very much for players to read as well. I did a chapter on something I call a match script. And what a match script is really helping players and helping coaches to help players pick between 1 and 3 tasks that they want to accomplish on the field in a game and in 95 minutes. And those tasks could be related to performance actions. They can be related to responsibilities within their role. They could be related to strengths they want to magnify, weaknesses they want to improve upon. They could be related to something to do with mindset. The key here is the tasks have to be specific, controllable, and positive. What you find when you talk with players, if we're talking about game day, is you ask them what are they trying to achieve, and they will often say, a striker will say, well, I'm trying to score, or a goalkeeper will say, I'm trying to keep a clean sheet, or somebody will say, I want to play well, I want to play at my best, or I want to be player of the match, or I don't want to mess up, or I want to stay in the team. And so I want players to have a more sophisticated relationship with performance to help them be better competitors. And so in order to do that, I want them to break it down. I want them to break their objectives down. And you could call this an ideal goal state. I want them to break their objectives down into specific, controllable, positive plays. I'll give you a working example. And I wrote about this person. He allowed me to talk about my work with him. An old case study now. He's now a retired footballer, Carlton Cole. If you remember him, he played for West Ham in England for a bit. And when I first started working with him, he was languishing in the West Ham reserve team. And I asked him, what are you trying to achieve? And he's very much gave me, well, I'm a striker. I want to score. I want to stay in the team. I don't want to let myself down. I don't want to let my teammates down, and so on and so forth. And I was like, okay, let's break this down. And by the time he made his debut for England, in February 2009. He was playing against Spain. Peter Crouch was coming off the pitch. He was coming on at 75th minute. And he had 3 objectives. It was nothing to do with scoring, although it was connected to. It wasn't, I've got to score. It wasn't, I want to play really well. It wasn't, don't want to mess up. It was always look for space. So non-stop look for space, defend from the front. And I think it was something like attack 6-yard area on crossing balls. So if you think about those 3 things, non-stop looking for space, is it specific? Absolutely. Is it controllable? Absolutely. Is it positive? Focused on what he wants? Absolutely it is. Specific, controllable, positive. So I'm always trying to help players and coaches to help players break things down to those kind of objectives on game day. And that's very practical. If every single player in your team has a match script, 1 to 3 plays. So for a 14-year-old, it could be 1 play. For a 20-year-old at college, it could be 3 plays. Now, that is great goal setting for game day. And if you notice, they're short, sharp, concise objectives that you can say to yourself very quickly, that you could picture going into a game, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, going into a Saturday game. And it's important to strip those back to very, very specific, short, sharp points. I think on coming back to the training piece here, and I call this a training script. And I actually wrote about this in Soccer Tough 2, which, as unsurprising as it sounds, is the sequel to Soccer Tough. I wrote about a training script. So not a match script, but a training script. Now, a training script comes back to this deliberate practice. And that could be more in depth. It could be more, you could be giving yourself a mark out of 10 for, I'm 5 out of 10 for scanning. I want to get to 6 out of 10. Well, what does that look like? I'm scanning 6, 7, 8 times a minute. And then you might get even more sophisticated about that, because we talk about scanning, but actually are people actually taking information in, looking at important clues, cues, triggers as they emerge and dissolve on the pitch as the game unfolds. So you can start to have conversations around that, the more sort of granular conversation. And I think in a training script, they could be a little bit broader, a bit more wordy, and just a bit more thought into those. So I'm conscious that I'm probably rambling, and I don't know if I'm answering your question here, but those are the kind of things that coaches could be doing.
Well, no, I love that. I think that's a great practical tool and takeaway to use with your players. And, one of the things I was thinking about as you were sharing that is, I think there's a lot of power in that, because I think it has the potential to keep us tethered to the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
And, especially for athletes, you shared that example of Carlton. Was that right?
Yeah, Cole.
Carlton. Like, those 3 things are so controllable. And regardless of what's happening in the game, the mistakes that he might make or his team might make, like, he can come back to, I've got to do these 3 things. I know these 3 things that I have control over, control to do consistently, regardless of what else is happening.
I can choose to do them.
Yeah. And I think that it's so powerful to have something like that to bring yourself back into the present moment, especially when emotions start to go and mistakes happen. And I'm just curious, though, from the coaching side of things, what might a coaching game script look like?
Yeah, really good question. And just to fire back at you, I love what you said there. It's almost cliche in sports psychology now to talk about staying in the present moment, cliche, because it's true. You're 100% spot on. But it very much begs the question, well, how do I do that? How do I stay in the present moment? We might all, and there might be a bit of flexibility around that. I suppose strategically as the game unfolds, I might think outside of the present moment and brainstorm what's happened and, how I might utilize what's happened in the last 5 minutes to help me solve problems as the game unfolds, or find solutions. And I'm being somewhat finicky there, I know, but by and large, we need to stay in the present moment. And so having tangible techniques can help us to do that. And I would also add to that what tends to be rife through the industry is very much next play, focus on next play. I hear it again a lot in the Premier League. Coaches go, next play, next play, next play. And it's like, well, yeah, absolutely. But actually helping them have something like a match script helps next play become more meaningful for players. It's just got more meaning there. It's not just next play. It's something that's important for them to focus on. And that's the way our nervous system works best, is that, a deep level of processing. We want something to be meaningful in the moment to dampen down any kind of emotion that might be maladaptive. Anyway, that's not answering your question. Let's answer your question. So a coach's game script. I mean, look, it's really about for a coach sitting down and thinking, asking this question, what are the 2 or 3 most important things that I must do? What's a strength that I want to magnify? What's my own coaching point that I want to improve upon? That's what's something I don't do so well that I want to improve upon, in this game. And it might be something to do with psychology, or it might be something to do with more coaching oriented, like observation, for example, or being more lean and lucid with your communication, or just being more self-aware around your behaviors or something like that. It could be a whole raft of things that you can focus on. But again, the skill is stripping it back into 2 or 3 specific, controllable, positive things. What is it that I want to do? What's specific? What can I control? That's the most important thing. It's just got to be oriented towards you. And I thoroughly recommend that coaches do that. Again, it's a part of your development. And this kind of, for me, comes under the rubric of self-skills. I'm writing my next book at the moment, and the opening chapter is on self-skills. And it's probably the least cool part of coach development, I suppose, in many respects. If you think of self-skills, we think of, I suppose, 4 in particular: self-awareness, self-control, analysis, self-development. And those would be my 4. Other psychs would probably mention other kind of self-skills. But I think you can't improve as a coach unless you're engaging in your self-skills. And there's that old sort of, it's not a saying, but let's call it a saying, that you could coach for 10 years but have 10 times 1 year of experience. We want 10 years of experience where we're accruing experiences and utilizing these experiences and getting better and better and better and better. Now, I don't think that happens unless you're engaging in your self skills. If you're aware of, what am I doing? What am I good at? What do I need to improve upon? What works for me? What are my own beliefs about coaching? What are my values? What helps me retain my performance and my well-being? These will, for me, all come under self-skills. And I think if you do that, then it gives you a better chance to engage in. If you're self-aware, you can engage in self-control. If you can engage in self-awareness and self-control, your self-reflections become better, and then your self-development plans become better. It's the underpinning of a self-development plan. So that's what I'd say there.
That's fantastic. 2 things I want to highlight there. One, I loved what you shared about that next play phrase and how it's probably much more powerful to, instead of saying that phrase, to remind them of their game script, of one of the things that they can come back to in that present moment to do. Dan, find space. That's all I need from you right now. Just be constantly scanning and finding space. And then the second thing that you talked about, and this is what I'd like to hit on a little bit more, is that process for a coach, like you're talking about, of that continual improvement and growth and evaluating yourself. And again, like we mentioned earlier, doing the same thing that you're asking your players to do, but in your coaching. Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode. I'll be back next week with part 2 of this conversation with Dan. As always, if you enjoyed the episode and you want to grab a copy of the podcast notes, which, like I said, are a special edition this week, go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast to grab a free copy of the notes. You're not going to want to miss these. And I've got 2 takeaways from this episode. First is something Dan mentioned a couple of times when we were discussing this psychologically informed environment. We should always be considering how the internal drives the external. And I'm sure that most of you are already doing this in your coaching, or you probably wouldn't be listening to this podcast. But I think it's still such an important reminder for all of us. We should be considering the internal, their thoughts, feelings, motivations, and aspirations of all the players we coach. Just doing this is going to make us a better coach. And second is what Dan shared about critically analyzing our own coaching. I love this quote. I think it's important for coaches to critically analyze their own coaching, to ask themselves, what was I trying to do there? Why was I trying to do that? Did that work? And can I do it better next time? And I think it connects well with another quote that I love from Dan. Coaching is essentially a mini experiment every single day, every single activity, every single second. If we embrace this mindset of coaching being a series of mini experiments, and we commit to critically analyzing those, I believe we'll all be on a trajectory of really amazing growth. And hey, don't forget to sign up for the first annual summer coaching series. 10 weekly presentations plus 2 bonus sessions from coaches and experts filled with practical ideas that you can apply in your coaching. When you sign up, you'll get live access to the presentations and Q&As, video replays, audio-only replays on a private podcast feed, detailed coaching notes just like the incredible set of notes we have for this week's episode with Dan, and more. The early bird price runs through May 9th, so sign up before the price goes up. You can learn more or sign up at summercoachingseries.com. Thanks for listening to the podcast.